So I want to start off with some vision, because I know that we all kind of understand like this would be helpful in doing the things. But to put some vision behind what we're doing here, one, we want to do behavior management to help our kids look more like Jesus, um, to like help correct and guide them so that when they leave here, they look more like Jesus. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. So training them up now so that they look like Jesus later and now. Because discipline is a godly principle. Hebrews 12:11 says, For at the moment all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So they are probably going to be mad at you when you have to discipline them. But we know that it's good. We know that it's godly. And so learning how to do that well is important. And then last, because we show the kids Jesus when we discipline well. So we look more like God when we know how to do behavior management in an effective way. Proverbs 3:11 through 12 says, My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof. For the Lord reproved him who he loves as a father the son in whom he delights. So like God disciplines, God behavior manages us all the time. And so when we do that well and in a godlike way, then we can show that to our kids. So that's our vision. That's why we're doing this. Not just so that you can have an easier time in KidZone, because you probably won't. You'll have tools and that'll be great, but our kids are hard. So that being said, not all of this, but a lot of this comes from a trauma-informed practice in therapy that we teach to parents. And the kids that we have now and the kids that we're probably going to reach in this community need trauma-informed practice. So that's why I've pulled a handful of these things. And some of these come from teaching and just being around kids a lot. But know that some of these things do come from that like trauma-informed, like lots of research has been done into them. So I'm not just pulling all this out of my butt. So there's that. So first, we want to make sure that we're well prepared. And I think we've been doing a pretty good job of that from what I've seen. That's the getting here early. That's making sure all your materials are prepared so you're not like running amok, because that's when the kids run amok. It's making sure that you pray beforehand, because then God can step in when you can't sometimes. And then what I've heard from a couple of you that I've started adding is writing down what you're doing for the day on the board, and kind of starting there. That helps. I mean, that helps everyone to know what's coming, but especially with some of our younger kids and some of our kids that aren't like quite on the same playing field, like mentally, like that is going to help them a lot. Or like ADHD, that's going to help a lot to know what's coming next, right? So that's something that I would recommend, is to write down your plan for the day, go through it with them. They're probably going to forget and ask you again anyway, but you have something to point back to. And then you also don't forget and end up scrambling. So that's your first step, is to make sure that you're well prepared. Second, the big thing here is consistency and follow through for all of these things. So praising, discipline, any of those things, that you're doing them consistently, like they know what to expect from you. Which is why this training will be helpful, because then we'll all be on the same page and help make it a little more consistent across the board. And then also follow through. So if you say like, if you do A, B, and C, you'll get a prize at the end of the day, make sure you do that if they've done all those things. Or if you say, hey, if I have to tell you one more time, you're going to need to take a break, then they do that one more time, you tell them to take a break. Otherwise, they don't know what of your words they can trust. And that's not going to help you or them. So, and that's looking more like God too, right? It's being consistent and following through. So that needs to follow you through like all of these things that we're going to talk about. So So I want to start with praise because hopefully that's most of what you're doing. Kids react very well to praise. You occasionally have to redirect. You occasionally have to take timeouts. Like that happens because sometimes kids are punks. But they're gonna react really well to praise. And when you praise other kids, the other kids are gonna be like, I want that. Yep. So that's where we're starting out because hopefully that's a lot of what you're doing. Things to do in praise. Be really specific. So not just like, hey, good job, Abby, but like, wow, Abby, I love how you're sitting there and you're looking at me and you're listening and like pointing out the things that they're doing. Like, I love that Ellie's sitting down and she's ready, pointing out those things and pointing it out for all the kids if you have to. Yeah. Because they're going to respond well to that and they're going to want it. Providing that praise as soon as possible after the behavior happens. If you do it much later, they're going to forget that it happened. Again, the consistency, an enthusiastic tone. Sometimes you got to amp yourself up a little more than your usual self. I definitely do. I'm way more chill than I am when I'm interacting with the kids. And then I like this note. I haven't seen it happen too much, but the note of don't complicate praise with negative add-ons. So, like, let's say, like, a kid finally sits down. You don't want to be like, ah, man, I love that you're sitting down. I wish you would do that more often. Yeah. Because then it's not all good. Yeah. That's not how praise works. So that's something to be cognizant of. I don't know how often any of you do it, but I thought that was a really good note to like lodge in there of like, don't sway back the other way. Yeah. Well, it could be, but in this sense of like the immediate thing that's happening, it's not a compliment sandwich,
Maybe if you in like a one-to-one pull aside, you could do a compliment sandwich.
Yeah, exactly.
But not in like the quick behavior happens.
Yeah, that's a good point. Using that sandwich one-on-one, if you gotta. Yeah, so that's praise. Questions, comments, praise. I'm just gonna roll through it and then I'm gonna make you role play things. It'll be great. Okay, so then next is active ignoring. So this is choosing not to react to non-dangerous, undesirable behavior. So they're not gonna hurt themselves or somebody else, but they're not doing what they're supposed to. And this will be a little hit or miss in the context of KidZone. So just be cognizant of when you're doing it, because I know that you all have to manage a whole room of kids. Sometimes you can't just ignore the behavior. But there are some things that you can ignore. And if they're just doing a thing to get attention and you ignore it, they'll stop. Ideally, right? So this is a good one to know. It's pretty straightforward. Avoid responding during and immediately after the behavior. Avoid verbal and emotional reactions like eye contact, facial expressions. Again, never ignore dangerous or unsafe behavior because that's not good. But things you can ignore are like defiant or angry statements directed at you. You don't really have to respond to those. If they're...
Hey, John.
Hi, John. Join us. If they're like making faces at you, rolling their eyes at you, smirking at you, they start mocking you. Like, these are things that you can ignore as long as it's not disrupting the rest of KidZone, right? Yeah. And sometimes that might be when your teammate steps in. If they're like directing a bunch of crap at you, just being punks at you, that might be when your helper steps in and pulls them aside so that you can keep doing what you need to do. So we can praise, we can ignore some things. But of course, there's going to be moments that you need to redirect. And obviously, there's a lot of giving instructions when you're doing that. So giving instructions. This will change some as we split age groups and as we get older kids, but with all of our young kids and like our older kids being pretty spacey, give your instructions one step at a time. If you give them too many in a row, they're going to forget them, and then everyone's going to be frustrated. So give them one at a time. When you see that they're completing the one, praise them for that, give them the next one. And that'll help you out a lot. One tip that I got I think it was when I was doing after school, is to make sure that you say the child's name at the beginning of your sentence. We can have a tendency to be like, hey, will you go grab that for me, Renee? And if that's a kid, they heard their name at the end, but not any of the instructions.
Yeah.
And so you're frustrated because they're not listening, but they didn't hear the first half of your statement.
Yeah.
So starting with their name, like, Renee, can you go grab that thing? Making sure they hear their name and then saying the thing, and lower the frustration of all the things. Like, a lot of this is just avoiding anything happening in the first place.
Yeah.
And then when you do have to redirect, give a reason. Kids are going to want to know why, and because I said so is not a good reason.
Yeah.
If we guide our kids that because I said so is a good reason, they could get led into a lot of bad things.
Yeah.
Because not all adults have their best interest at heart, unfortunately. So it doesn't have to be a complicated reason, but like, hey, like, I need you to stop running around. I don't want you to trip and hurt someone else. Or, I need you to stop running around. We need to focus on this right now. Like, not just, hey, stop, because they're,
Yeah.
why? Who said? Doesn't matter. Don't really feel like stopping. So giving them a reason, and if they keep asking you why, give them a reason. They want to know. If it's like a reasonable question, answer the question. And then hopefully, it'll take a few times, but hopefully that'll come into their brain the next time that they want to run amok in circles in the room while there's scissors on the ground,
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So there's redirection. And then if it comes to it, taking a break, which I'm going to give these out again. Oof. You've probably seen this at some point, hopefully. But it hasn't been out in a while. I didn't take one for myself, but that's fine. So I'll just grab one when it comes back around. But this is our like relatively official discipline protocol for KidZone. This is more so for if they need to take a break. You've praised, you've ignored, you've redirected. They're being punks. Because sometimes they are, and sometimes they need a break. Thanks. So here's the goal of the break. The goal of using a break is to interrupt their undesirable behavior, and it also is a form of some form of punishment by removing attention, which may mean that you need them to like sit on the other side of the door. As long as you can see them, that's okay.
I was gonna say, if both of you were in here, you can still have them outside on the other side of the door.
Like, you can close the door and set them right there.
Okay.
So you can still see them through the window.
Okay.
That's fine. And your safety human will be out there too. So you can always grab whoever's on safety and be like, hey, they need to take a break. Some of them will be able to do it in here, to like sit over there and like take a breather. And that's ideal. But it's not going to work for all our kids. So knowing that that's the goal of taking a break, is to interrupt the behavior and remove attention. And then you, as the adult, are actively ignoring any behaviors that are happening while they're in the break. So if they're sitting over there and they're like fussing and screaming and whatever, we're just going to let it be. Unless it's, unless it's
They're like trying to run.
horribly interruptive or it's dangerous or
Yeah.
whatever. So in general, here's what it is. So you have kind of a few different options. You've got 2 warnings and a break. This is what most things will probably be. It's like not listening, like just making a mess on purpose, being mean to each other. They're being disruptive, but not necessarily hurtful. Like nothing horribly bad is happening. So give them the 2 verbal warnings. Make sure they hear you, understand it, know that, like, okay, if this happens again, you're going to need to take a break. Yep, so then the 3rd time it occurs, give them a break. We don't call it a timeout in KidZone because parents have strong feelings about the word timeout. Some of them do. So it's a break. It's semantics, so just roll with it. So have them sit out about the number of minutes as their age, or just a few minutes to calm down and to like refocus. 1 warning and then a break would be like if you've got a small kid that's like hitting people, because you don't want them to be able to hit people multiple times before a consequence happens. But if they're toddlers and they're hitting someone, they also don't necessarily understand things yet. So giving them that 1 warning is good. Talking to them, asking what they could do next time, that sort of deal, and then taking a break. Automatic breaks would be school-aged kids who are like fighting. That's kind of the main time that I would think that would happen. Or you'd have to know them very well, but like persistent problems that you're seeing with the same kid. Or like, hey, like we just talked about this, you know, like why don't you go take a break? Just to get in control. And of course, like if things are getting really bad, if you cannot get the kid in control, parents are out there and you are allowed to go get them. It is still their kid at the end of the day. But we don't want to have to do that. So make that your last resort. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes they just have a bad day. And sometimes the reason they're acting out is just because they want mom. So if it needs to happen, it needs to happen. And don't feel bad about doing that if you've tried other things. And then the big thing there is then make sure that you're talking to parents if there were any major problems. And talking to parents when there were really good things. It's really fun to tell parents like, hey, they did so good today. I was really impressed when they did this. And the parents love it, the kids love it, and it's gonna get like, it'll leave you at the end of the day in a more positive place, even if crap hit the fan, to be able to point out those good things. So this is yours. I believe it's on our CCB page to look at if you ever need to, but it's pretty straightforward. Again, the big thing here is if you say you're going to give a break, make them take a break, make them take a break. Don't fake them out. So, finally, things to avoid. Avoid getting in an argument with a kid. It's not worth it. They'll try to argue with you about it. Try not to do that. Ignore it, let it be. Walk away, do something else, whatever. This one was called the Zap Trap, which I thought was hilarious. A weird name. And that's criticizing while praising. That's sort of what we talked about before, of like attaching that negative onto the end of your praise, where you're like, you're doing a great job this time, wish you would have done it last time. Try to catch that. If you're feeling yourself getting impatient, tap out. That's why there's 2 people. You're allowed to tap out and go do something else. Let somebody else handle it for a minute. But don't leave it there with the kid. If you've been having like back and forth where you're like trying to redirect and you're having struggles with this kid, make sure you come back to it after they do come down, to make sure that you're keeping your relationship with that kid positive. So you don't want to end on discipline, you know. That's not where you want to end for the day. And try to avoid becoming overly emotional in response to a behavior. You probably will feel overly emotional in response to some behavior at some point. But there is a place to like express that, and it's not in front of the kid. You once things are calmed down, and if you have a decent enough relationship with him, you are more than welcome to say like, hey, that kind of made me upset when you did that. Like, it felt really disrespectful, or like, you're allowed to say those things, but like, you don't want to become overly emotional in the moment and do something that doesn't resemble Jesus. And if something like really gets to you, like, I try to come back here and check in every week. If I don't, come find me, and we can rant about it and pray about it and all of that. Because we do have a hard group of kids, and the more kids that we reach in this neighborhood, the harder they're going to be honest with you. It'll be so worth it. But we're dealing with kids that have a lot of trauma and a lot of difficulties in their past or now. So being ready for that, praying into it. That's why we do all these things, right? That's why we try to avoid them as much as we can.